as the controversy continues to snowball over remarks made by a BJP spokesperson since suspended over the Prophet and continue to convulse the Islamic world in particular. I'm joined by a very special guest, the former Vice President and an expert and authority on West Asia, where he served for several years, Mr. Hamid Ansari. Appreciate your joining us, Mr. Ansari. How do you see this controversy, particularly in West Asia, where several of the countries have protested and condemned the Indian government and India also?
It is not only West Asia. It is Indonesia, it is Iran, and countries all across the board. You see, the point is every faith has got certain touch points. Every faith, irrespective of what the faith is. In the case of Muslims, the personality of the Prophet of Islam is very, very important, and references to it always have to be very carefully done. So when somebody goes out of his or her way and say rude things about the person, I mean, mind you, these are historic personalities 1500 years back, and yet the sensitivity is very great.
The reason I'm asking you this is, A, there are those who will say that West Asia is no one to lecture us, or indeed the Islamic world. Many of these countries do not respect human rights themselves. Who is Pakistan, for example, a serial offender of minority rights to lecture India? Who is Afghanistan, ruled by the Taliban, to lecture India on minority rights or human rights? How does that fit in with what you just said, respect the sentiments of people?
You see, two things. There are sentiments of followers of a faith. I'm not talking of nationals of a country. I'm talking of followers of a faith. Now, faith is a unifying thing.
No, effectively, then you're talking about wider Islamic brotherhood, as if anything said in India by a party spokesperson in a TV studio then enrages the entire Islamic world.
Because it affects every Muslim. The sentiment-wise, it affects every Muslim. Every Muslim, practicing, non-practicing, whether it is in Africa, whether it is in the Arab world, whether it is in Asia, where the great majority of Muslims actually live. 70% of Muslims of the world are in 4-5 Asian countries: Indonesia, Bangladesh, India, China, Pakistan, maybe Turkey, Iran.
But isn't this politics of offended sentiments a very dangerous track to go on? Because tomorrow there could be Hindus in this country who will say, for example, when M.F. Hussain, the great painter, would painted in a manner that was seen to be offensive to Hindu gods and goddesses. He got security in Qatar, the same Qatar which has been the first country in a way to stand up and protest against India.
No, people felt offended. Mr. Hussain accepted that, and he paid the price for it. So the question is, in matters of faith, you have to be very careful, very sensitive. It's not a question of correctness in logical terms.
You don't accept the argument that this is an overreaction to blame virtually, to suggest that India itself, to use the OIC statement, India must address incidents of defamation and insult to Prophet, and then goes on to say, the OIC statement, the growing spate of hatred and defamation of Islam in India, cites the hijab ban, bulldozers, alleged violence against Muslims. One statement made, unfortunate, slanderous, by a party spokesperson in a TV studio should not lead to this kind of wide condemnation of India as a country, surely.
Wouldn't you consider that this is something which has been happening over time? People are not talking about it, but it's happening over time. We've seen it happen in different parts of the country. You and I live here, so we know. For example, I mean, recently elections in the biggest state of the country, UP, great efforts were made, to assume provocative positions. It is to the credit of the minority community in UP that they did not get provoked. And it is to the credit of their leadership or religious leadership to say to the public, don't get provoked. So this is not something which is happening suddenly. It has been happening over time. We've seen it happen over 10 years or more.
You seem to be suggesting that there is a built-in Islamophobia.
Well,
Is that what you're going to call it, or are you saying that it's gone well beyond that as well? Is that what you're suggesting? And are you suggesting that this has only happened in the last 8 years after the BJP came to power? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, if you are in power, you can do a lot of things which you don't do when you are not in power. So I'm not saying I know the term exists way back in the election manifesto of the BJP in 2009 and also in the election manifesto of 2014, civilizational consciousness. But the question is, what do you mean by civilizational consciousness? If you interpret it in a very narrow sort of way, then you end up with what is today being called Hindutva, which all learned people say it has nothing to do with Hinduism. It is a political ideology with a certain kind of orientation attached to it.
But I still come back to it, Hamid Ansari. There will be those who will say that in the name of Islamophobia, countries with deplorable human rights records are using this one instance to target an entire government. The Modi government says, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas.
Yes.
The Modi government says that when we give an Ujjwala gas cylinder, we don't discriminate between Hindus and Muslims. Our welfare schemes are targeted towards all.
Correct.
Our critics are determined to somehow suggest that we are demonizing Muslims. And then along comes an instance like this. And they say these are fringe elements. Why are you targeting an entire government or an entire country?
Two things. You would use the expression, or you quoted somebody's expression, fringe elements.
Yes, the government of India in fact suggested they were fringe elements.
They were not fringe elements. These are spokesmen of the ruling party, and not just any spokesman, an important spokesperson. She herself has said that she has been in it from the word go. If you were a Delhi man, you would know that she has a background at Delhi University, etc., etc., etc. But besides the point, this is not fringe. This is a hardcore reaction, except that in one case out of maybe 100, it provoked. The wrong word was used, the wrong expression was used. You see, the short answer would have been, our governments have this problem all the time with each other. This offends me, that offends me. You know, you talk it out. You mention it quietly. You call in the ambassador, you say, not good, etc., etc. Why is it that this has happened in the same week as the report to the Congress by the US Secretary of State? And the language that the report uses, a country of special concern.
You are suggesting, Mr. Ansari, that there is a link between the reaction that we are seeing from the Islamic world and what the US Secretary of State Blinken said in the context of concern over human rights violations in India. You're drawing a direct relation. You're suggesting that this is against the backdrop that we must see this as a growing concern globally, is it?
There is a growing concern globally. I'm not saying it is backdrop. But you know and I know that year by year, US embassies all over the world collect information of interest to them. So our friends on Shantipat or anywhere else in the country, they collect this information. But at what stage do they reach the conclusion that this is a matter of mention to the Congress? Particular concern, mark the words, English language.
So the government of India, as they have responded to the OIC very strongly, says that this is motivated, misleading and mischievous comments. In fact, they've called it unwarranted, narrow-minded and in a way communal. So there seems to be a belief in the Indian state that this is an attempt being made by the Islamic world to unfairly target India. This is a country where over the years Muslims have been treated with great respect. You became the Vice President of India. President Abdul Kalam, on whose road, the road on which we are sitting and chatting is named after him, became the President of India. We use the instance of a BJP spokesperson to suddenly suggest that Muslims are in danger in India, are being reduced to second-class citizens. Are we exaggerating, overreacting?
No, no, look, you mentioned OIC or Islamic organization.
Yes.
I have my own views on that, and those are not views of yesterday. I have had these views for a very long time.
What are they?
We were founder members, and we were thrown out thanks to our good neighbors. And we have or we should have maintained that position. But then, out of the blue, suddenly the Foreign Minister of India, the late Mrs. Swaraj,
Sushma Swaraj.
yeah, goes and attends an OIC meeting. I was aghast, personally. Why should
you see the OIC as a communal organization?
No, I don't see OIC as a communal organization. OIC is only one of those multiple organizations of countries which come together to push a particular point of view. I've been ambassador to UN, so I know the multiplicity of organizations that exist. OIC has meaningless except for what the members do or don't do. So OIC was, until very recently, totally dominated by our good neighbors across the borders, totally dominated by the Saudis. And then this relationship inside keeps going up and down. Sometimes the Saudis are heavier, sometimes the Turks are heavier, sometimes the Indonesians are heavier. Pakistanis keep trying all the time. But they are very selective, they are very political. Nobody would say anything of what might have happened elsewhere, let's say in China, for example.
That's exactly what I was going to come to. In China, for example, the Muslim population, the Uyghur population there has been targeted,
very much
has been victimized.
Very much so. OIC has kept quiet.
OIC has kept quiet. Many of the same countries which today are protesting to India over the statement of the TV spokesperson have kept quiet when it comes to China.
But you tell me, right, David, which are the countries which are protesting? Qatar, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, just in West Asian region. With each one of them, over the last few years, we have had a remarkably warm relationship with each one of them. Some of them have awarded the Prime Minister. Prime Minister has visited most of them, if not all. So what has suddenly gone wrong? They're surely not enemies. We have an excellent trading relationship with them. We have good political understanding. I mean, where else would you get a wanted man in a jail in Saudi Arabia returned to India? Except through cooperation at a level amongst intelligence agencies which doesn't happen normally.
Which is precisely the point, Mr. Ansari. Over the last 8 years, the Modi government's achievements has been this reach out to the Gulf and West Asia.
I say it, absolutely remarkable. I've worked for a very long time in West Asia. I know things when things were difficult, when they would be less than friendly, occasionally hostile also. And yet things have changed over time. It hasn't changed in last 8 years. It has been changing. Dr. Manmohan Singh went there a long time back. Srimati Indira Gandhi went there. So things have changed.
So they've changed for the better in terms of diplomatic relations. We've got a stronger economic relationship with all the countries in the region. We are signing bilateral trade agreements. And yet when it comes to this one instance, suddenly you've got India being seen as a country which is demonizing Muslims, is responsible for spreading hatred against Muslims. Reconcile these two.
Well, you tell me. These are countries when nobody says they are democratic countries. They are autocratic. Forms of autocracy are there. So if something happens there, and that too at a politically expressible manner, it happens with the approval of the autocrats, isn't it? So if something happens to the government of Qatar, it has the approval at some stage, not at some stage. It happens in Kuwait, same thing. Happens in Abu Dhabi, same thing. Saudi Arabia, same thing. So the point to note is, as I would as a professional note, that these protests are indicative of a concern at the political level, and they have therefore to be tackled politically.
Mr. Ansari, in conclusion then, what's the way forward? Because there are those who are today threatening violence against Nupur Sharma. She has been given extra security. There are those who are saying arrest her right away, imprison her. What's your view on this? How do you resolve sensitive issues, as you call them, in a manner that we can actually move forward?
By a legal method, nothing else. It doesn't matter whether this lady committed the offense or this gentleman committed the offense. If they committed the offense, let the law take its course. You see, as I said it, there are two ways about it, and both have to move together. One is the path of law, whatever the law dictates. But the other is the political path. The leadership has to follow the political path also. Why is it that, I mean, this incident which has happened in the countries of the Persian Gulf and elsewhere, why is it that no political leader in it, of the ruling government, has said anything about it? Why is it that the foreign minister has not spoken? Why is it that the Prime Minister, with all the stature of the Prime Minister and of this Prime Minister, with his relationship with the ruling class in those countries, has not spoken? This is not accidental. These things don't happen like that. You can't leave it to the official spokesman of the Ministry of External Affairs. He'll say all the right things. But there comes a time when saying the right thing is not enough. Because a spokesman to spokesman, foreign secretary to foreign secretary, is of no consequence in these matters.
At a personal level, therefore, do you still feel optimistic about the future? As a former vice president, as a proud Indian citizen of this country, do you feel still optimistic that the ideals of 1947, of 1950 will be preserved?
Oh yes, I am optimistic. I'm an old man.
फिर सुबह होगी.
सुबह होगी, बिल्कुल होगी. रात होगी तो सुबह भी होगी. No two views about it, because, mind you, all said and done, the majority of population in this country still thinks sanely. Isn't it? It doesn't matter what language I speak. It may be Tamil, it may be Assamese or anything else. But I have to have that approach, which is a typically Indian approach, and a special Indian approach of accommodation of diversity. To say that I tolerate is simply not enough. I don't have to tolerate. Tolerate is a negative term. I have to accept. I have a fraternal tie with you. You are my brother. I am your brother.
Mr. Hamid Ansari, appreciate your joining me and talking to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rajdeep. Thank you very much.